Hello everybody and welcome back to the Flutter tutorial. So in today's video, we're going to be working with databases and storing all of the content in our app in a database. This may take more than one video. We'll see how much we get done now. But the first thing we're going to need to do is actually just set up a database on Firebase. So we've done most of the setup necessary for all the Firebase stuff already. We've connected our app to it, so all the hard stuff is done. What we need to do now is simply go to this database tab from our Firebase console on the left-hand side. And then for you guys, you won't see this page. You'll probably see a page that says create new database, or there'll be some buttons there, and there'll be two different types of databases you can pick from, either a Firestore database or a real-time database. When you're clicking create new database, if it gives you the option to select them, select a real-time database. So somehow create a real-time database. When it's asking you to set that database up, set it up in test mode. It will ask you, do you want to put it in locked mode? Do you want to put it in test mode? Select test mode. If you've done that, you should be brought to a page that looks something like this. If for some reason you're here and you're like, hey, how do I change between Firestore? I can only see that. There's a button right here where you can select between Cloud Firestore or real-time database. Obviously, right now I'm in real-time database, but once you get to this page and you've created the database, click on rules and make sure that read and write are set to something that's going to evaluate to true. You guys might see something that says like now is less than and like a bunch of numbers. If you see that, that's totally fine. What that is saying is essentially, hey, we're going to let this database be readable and writable while the current date is less than some date in the future. So it's saying pretty much that in 30 days or whatever the date is that you guys have there, we will lock this database and make sure that no one can read and write to it, and you have to come back and manually change the rules. The reason for this is it's very insecure to have your database with read and write as true. That means anyone who has a reference to your database can read and write from it. Meaning they can look at accounts, they can look at information, like everything, right? So if you're putting this into a production app, then you're not going to have these set as true, and you're going to have to do kind of a more advanced authentication. Since we're just learning right now, and this is for tutorial, I don't care. We're going to leave this as true, but if you are planning on putting this in production, note that you will have to change these and do a few other steps as well. Okay, so now that we have that, I'm going to go back to data, and I'm just going to leave this kind of minimized in the background because we will be referencing this page just to make sure that everything is actually working. All right, so now that we have that, we're going to go into our Flutter application, and the first thing we're going to do is go to our pubspec.yaml file. We should be familiar with this by now, and we're going to add in, sorry, I was in the wrong project folder there. I'm in the right one now, but sorry, go to our pubspec.yaml file, and then what we're going to do is add one more dependency, which is actually the Firebase Database. Now I have to find what version this is. Okay, I'm just going to copy it in from my other screen here. But this is it, so Firebase Database, and this is going to be version 3.1.6. So add that into the dependencies and then save. I know you guys can't really see the pop-up because my face cam is covering it, but there is a little thing that's saying Flutter pub get was being run. As always, if that didn't run, then you can just go to the command palette and then go pub get packages, and that will look through the pubspec.yaml and make sure that you have all the packages that you need. But assuming you added this in there and you didn't see any errors popping up or anything, we're good to go. And now we're going to make a new file inside of our lib folder here, and I'm going to call this one database.dart. All right, so the first thing we need to do here is just import a few modules. So we're going to say import package : and then we're going to go Firebase _database / Firebase _database .dart. So that's the file we need there. And then the next one we're going to do is we're simply going to import post from our own file here. So we'll just say import post.dart. Now, the reason we need this is because all of the database related stuff is going to be dealing with the posts. So essentially, saving posts, updating posts. Oh, a user liked that post. We need to change how many likes they have. So I'm just importing posts so we can actually use that class. And then what we're going to do is set up our database reference, which is actually going to reference the database. And I'll kind of talk about how this stuff works, but we're just going to call this database reference like that, if I could type it properly. And that's going to be equal to a Firebase database .instance.reference. So what this is doing is saying, okay, we've connected to Firebase here. Let's get the Firebase database instance. Let's get a reference to that. So now we can simply use database reference whenever we're looking for a certain record in the database. So if I have a look here, excuse me, sorry. This is the record I'm talking about. When we ask for dot reference here, that's going to give us a reference to this. And now that we have this, we'll be able to see anything within it. So essentially, if I click new here, you can see I can add a name and I can add a value. That's data that's being stored inside of this. So if we have a reference to this, then we can now add data, retrieve data, all of that fun stuff. Anyways, this will make more sense in a sec, but that's what we need for the reference. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, show us how we can add something to the database. So to actually save a new post, what we need to do is we need to make a function here that can simply add that to the database. So I'm going to say database reference, because this is what we're going to return, save post, and then this is going to take a post like that. So what this method is going to do, or what this function is going to do that I'm writing inside of here, is simply take a post object, do some stuff to it, and then automatically save that in our Firebase database. This is just the first thing I want to test out to make sure that everything's working. And yeah. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say var id equals database reference dot child. I'm going to do posts slash, and then I'm going to say dot push. Now, I know this makes no sense to you, so let me explain. Database reference is the reference to our database. The way that this kind of works is there is children in the database, which are kind of like the different sections of items almost, right? So we could have like users, posts, photos, images, comments, like stuff like that, kind of the different database tables. This works different than your like standard database. It's like a really simplified form, but you can imagine that underneath here, there's kind of a tree of different objects. So maybe we have like a post object, and then within that, we have all of the different posts. Maybe we have like a comments object, and that has all of the different comments. So when I'm saying database reference dot child posts, what I'm doing is saying, okay, I want to reference something called posts within the database. Now, right now, we don't have anything called posts, right? There's nothing in here that we can see that is called posts. So what this will do is automatically create this new reference called posts within the database. Now, the reason I'm doing this slash is I'm pretty much saying, hey, I want to reference a child that is kind of like a folder, right? That's not one individual object, but that holds multiple objects. So just like if you're talking about like a path, right? And you had like, desktop, and then maybe in our case, I had like Flutter as a folder, and I did another slash, then that would tell me, oh, hey, this is a directory, this isn't a file. So that's the same thing here with posts. We're saying that's kind of like a directory to where the posts are. And dot push is saying, okay, so every time that we add a new entry into posts, we need to give that entry a unique ID. So just like any database system you might have worked with before, every single entry in the database has to have some kind of unique identifier that allows us to differentiate it between something else. Because technically, the same person could post two different posts, and they could have the exact same content. And if we didn't have any unique ID for them, we wouldn't have any way to differentiate between them, right? So we need a unique ID. So what this is going to do, this push, is going to give us a database reference to a unique ID that we can store inside of posts. So all we have to do now is take this ID and set that kind of like object that's in our database to hold the values that we want. So I'm hoping that's kind of making sense. Once I add this in, you'll see a lot more clear how this actually works. But now I have ID, which is kind of like a placeholder item in my database. And now what I need to do is just set the content that this is going to hold, or set the data this is going to store. So I say id.set, and then inside of here, we need to put a JSON serializable object. Now, if you're unfamiliar with JSON, that's totally fine. But essentially what we need to do is we need to take this post object that's being passed into us, and we need to kind of serialize it into a dictionary that has key value pairs. So rather than having, like actual attributes on the class, we're going to have a dictionary that says body. Okay, that's equal to this. Author, that's equal to this. Likes, that's equal to this. Yada, yada, yada. Okay, so what I'm going to do actually is modify this post class a little bit, just because we're going to need to kind of change how things work based on how this database goes. And actually, we'll do that first, and then I'll get into how we actually serialize this into something that can be stored in the database. So let me zoom in a little bit. Okay, so we have body, author, likes, and user liked. First thing I'm going to do is get rid of this user liked. The reason for that is that we had that before just to tell us if the current user had liked this post or not. But now when we have multiple users using our app, that's not really going to mean much to us if we have this true or false value and, we load that in on two different people's things. Essentially what that would mean, as soon as one user, only one person liked this post, no one else would be able to like it, because we don't have a unique way to determine which user liked the post. We just know if a user liked the post. So rather than saying user liked, what I'm actually going to do is completely change likes. And I'm going to say, instead of int likes, I'm going to say list users liked equals an empty list. And sorry, actually, we're not going to make this a list. I'm going to make this a set, and we'll talk about why in a sec. Okay, so now I have a set, and what this set is going to store is all of the IDs of the users that have liked this post. So that way I can tell how many users have liked this post based on how many entries there are in this set. And I can see, oh, has this user liked this post already? Well, if they're in the set, they have. If they're not in the set, they haven't. And that'll be the way we determine whether we add a like or subtract a like, is just simply by adding users to the set or removing users to the set. So now instead of like post, what I'm going to do is say if this.usersLiked.contains, and we're going to need to now take a Firebase user. So what we're going to do is pass, we'll pass a Firebase user into like post, which says, okay, well, if we like a post, you need to give me the user that liked it. And then we're going to see if this contains the user.uid. So what we'll do is if it does contain the user UID, then we're going to say this.userLiked.remove and then user.uid. Otherwise, we'll add the user ID into the set. So this.userLiked.add user.uid. Hoping that makes sense, but that's kind of the basics. That's how we're going to do it with the likes. We're just going to have a list now, so we've actually shortened out the amount of attributes. Now, the next thing I'm going to add on here is actually an ID. So I'm going to say string underscore ID and just leave it like that. Now, the reason I'm doing that is because since we're now storing this in the database, all of these posts need to have some kind of ID associated with them. If I want to update this post, well, I need to know what post to update, right? So I have to have an ID on it so that I can actually reference the thing. So instead of actually just having ID, I'm going to change this to be a database reference. And what this is going to do now is let me store the reference in the database to this specific post object. We won't display this anywhere on the screen, but we just kind of need this in the back end when we're updating objects. So now what I will do is I will make now a method that will allow us to change the ID. So I'm just trying to think what I want to do next. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say void set ID. And what I'm going to simply say in here is we'll take a database reference ID and we'll do this dot underscore ID equals ID. Next, we're going to make a method that can actually transform this entire post into a dictionary. So I'm going to say map string and then dynamic. And what this is going to do is it's going to be called toJSON, and it's going to return a a map, which is just a simple dictionary that has string keys, and dynamic, meaning pretty much anything as the values associated with those keys. So toJSON like that, and now we'll simply return, and we're just going to make a dictionary, and you'll see what I'm going to do in here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say author like that, author colon, and this is going to be author. So we could do this.author just to specify as well. So author, this.author, comma, we're going to say users liked, users liked, and then colon, this.users liked. And then finally, what else do we need? We need the body. And then we'll say body and this.body. All right, so there we go. Now we have actually what we wanted to kind of serialize. So we're pretty much just setting it up so it's a dictionary, right? We just have a string key and then we have what the actual value is. I know it seems like, oh, well, why did we have to do that? But you'll see, just for us to store things in Firebase, it needs to look like this. So user liked is going to be a set. So what I'm actually going to do is I need to change this user liked set into a list. The reason for that is sets are not serializable within kind of like JSON objects. So whenever we have a set, we just have to turn it into a list. We want it to be a set because it's really fast to perform contains operations, add operations, and remove operations in a set. whereas a list is a lot slower. But as soon as we actually want to store this in a database, we'll have to convert that to a list. So that's what we do right here. Okay, so now we have all of that, and you can imagine that if we're now going to store this in the database, we need a way to actually take this and turn this back into a post object that we can use internally. So we'll do that next, but let's go to database. I just want to get you thinking about that. And let's say id.set, and let's go post.toJSON. So what this will do is it will take our post object, it will call this toJSON object, which will return that map, and then we'll save that map in the database. And then what we'll do is we'll return that ID, and that will be pretty much all we actually need to do when we save this post. Okay, great. So I think that should be working. So what I'm going to do now is just make it so that when we make a new post, we'll just call that just to see if that's actually working. And then we'll keep going from there. So let's go to text input widget. Actually, this is going to be my homepage, and where it says a new post, what we're going to do is when we add the new post, we'll also add that to the database. So instead of just having new post, I'm going to say var post equals that, and this doesn't necessarily need to be inside of set state, but we can say var post equals new post. Let's put that above here. And then we will say post.add, and we will add that post. And before we do that, actually, we need to save the post. So we're going to call save post, which is the method that we put inside of database.dart. When I called that, it automatically imported, what was it? Database.dart. You can see that at the top right there. So save post, and that's what we need to do. And then what we'll do after we save the post is we're actually going to say post._id equals, and funny enough, that's going to be equal to save post. So let's just do that, and not _id. This is going to be set id, and we will set that equal to save post. Okay, so I think that's good. Let me just go over this again. What we're doing is we're calling save post, right? We're giving it that post object that we just created up here. So now if I actually go to post, we can see that save post, what that does is, that's in database, save post, what that does is store this in the database, and it returns us an ID. So once we have that ID, now we need to actually add that. So if I can find where this was, to this post object so that it knows where it is if we have to update it or something later on. And then we go this.setState and we say post.add, and we add that to the list. So let's see if this is working now. I'm going to run the app. Oh, build errors. Let's see what our errors are here. Okay, so we need to make a few changes just because I realized we did modify that post object and I didn't modify where it was being used. So if we go ahead and look in postlist.dart, rather than going post.likes, we're going to go post. And this is going to be user_liked.length. So we can figure out how many people liked it just by getting the length of that set. And then same thing here, instead of saying post.userLiked, we'll say post.usersLiked.contains. And then what we're actually going to need to do is get the current user's UID and see if the current user has liked it by just checking if they're contained in the set of users that have liked that. So I don't think we actually have access to the user object in here. So that's the next thing that we're going to need to change. So let me actually just close some of this stuff here. We now need to make sure that we're actually passing in the user object to this so that we can use that. So if we look here, let's see, stateful widget. Let's now add another field up here. So let's say final Firebase user, like that, and we'll just call this user. And then inside of post list, we'll say this.user. So now this means we have to pass in our user object to the post list. So let's go back to my home page, which is, I believe, where we call this. And do we have user here? No, we actually only have name. So now we're going to change this as well inside of my home page so we have access to user. So instead of final string name, we're going to say final Firebase user, like that. And instead of name, this is going to be user. Now this is going to be this.user. And instead of widget.name, we're going to say widget.user.display name. And that should be good. Firebase user. Okay, it's saying we don't have this imported. So let's hover over it, click quick fix, and then import library, Firebase auth from there. Okay, so now we have all the packages we need. What I did to do that again was just hovered over it. There was a quick fix, and I just pressed import the module that we need. Okay, so now post list is saying, hey, we're missing an argument. That's because we now need to pass the user through. So within post list, we're going to say widget dot user. All right, so that should have hopefully fixed the errors. I'll quickly go over what we did. We just modified my home page so that rather than taking a name, we're now taking a user. We are then now, rather than just calling the post list with post, we're going to pass it a user. Inside of post list, we've now added a user so that we can store that here. And that way now we can check inside of post.userLiked.contained, which is down here, if the widget.user.uid is contained in the list of people that have liked this post. So if it is, that means we liked it, and then we'll obviously display that green icon. So one last thing we're going to need to do, we need to go to login. And rather than calling my home page here with user.displayName, we're going to call it just with user. So we just passed user now. And I think that should be all the changes we need to make. And let's go ahead and actually run this app and see if that's working. So I'm going to press F5. Doesn't look like we're getting any. All right, so this app is loaded up. I'm going to press sign in with Google. And now I will simply press my Google account to sign in. And let's see. All right, we get brought to this message page. Let me type hello. And when I do that, we can see this message actually gets added here, and it's working. So let's see if I can like this. It doesn't look like the like thing is working, so I might have made a mistake here, and it does look like I did because there was a exception thrown. We'll have a look at that in a second. But let's go to the database and see if anything got added. So I don't believe anything got added. I think that is probably because of the exception. So I'm going to have a look at this exception. I'll be back and I'll discuss what went wrong. All right, so I've determined what the issue was here. Essentially, when we pressed that like button, we were having an exception thrown. So the reason for that is if we have a look here, we can say that we're calling this.like, which is the method up here, which just has the set state here for us. And we're giving it a callback function, which is like post. Now let's have a look at post.likePost and actually see what that is. Okay, so here we are. And we can see that this actually accepts a Firebase user, but when we're here and we just pass post.likePost, we're not actually passing the argument that we need to within here. So what I'm going to do is simply change this to be an arrow function. And then where it says post.likePost, inside of here, I'm going to pass, I believe it's widget.user. So since we have access to user up here, what I need to do is make sure that actually when we pass the callback function, we pass a function that's going to call like post with the user that liked that post. So we just make a little arrow function, which says, okay, this is kind of an anonymous function, that this function will simply call this function. So when we call the callback, it will call post.likePost and pass the argument widget.user. So let me refresh quickly here and let's try this again and let's see if things are working. So sign in with Google. Choose my account. All right, and then let's just go hello. And there we are. Okay, so I don't see any errors right now. Doesn't look like anything's gone wrong. Let's go ahead and like it, and we can like and unlike and see that that is working. So now I'm actually going to go over here to this message app, and it still seems like nothing is showing up here. So give me 1 sec. I'll have a look into this. And oh, sorry, after I refresh the page, there we go. Things are showing up. So here we go. We can see that we have posts, and then we have 2 posts actually added right here. So we have Tim Rasika who said hello, another Tim Rasika who said hello. And now if I go back to my app actually, and let's have this open at the same time so we can kind of see this, and let's go test and let's hit enter, we can see that this gets added to the posts. So this is kind of the tree structure I was talking about. We have posts, which is kind of like this one of the branches of the tree. And then within that, we have all of the different posts that have their unique IDs. And the way we generated these IDs was by calling that push method from that database file that we had. So, okay, so that's the basics of that. Obviously, none of this is showing any of our users liked. That's because we haven't liked any of these posts. But see, if I liked these posts, nothing's changing. So we need now a way to actually update these posts that when we like it, we can tell that we've liked this post.